Hey,
Hey man, how you doing?
good, good. How goes it?
Yeah, I'm good. It's great to chat to you like this.
It's pretty insane. Like technology, I'm just checking the vibe here, but how awesome is it that we can like use this time to link up
I know, right?
and
And
just like connect dots that normally wouldn't connect?
yeah, and it's like we're both so busy. It's like at this point we're all at home. It's like everyone's at home. You
Yeah.
know,
How's
no
everything?
one's
How's
around.
the transmission? You hear me well?
Yeah, I'm hearing you great.
Perfect.
Yeah,
Super
man.
excited. Can you see me? Is my head in the frame?
Yeah. I mean,
Perfect.
I'm pretty kind of close up. I could turn from back there.
Yeah, but you're in, like for context, where you at right now?
I'm in London. Yeah, just at my house, which is kind of like on the outskirts of London.
Nice.
Yeah.
Just
Where are you? Chicago.
Chicago, yeah.
Okay, cool.
Chicago, camped out. Haven't been traveling for what, like 3 weeks now, I feel like.
Oh wow.
Where were you at when sort of like the doomsday scenario hit?
But this is the weird thing. The scenario hit just as the ancestors were about to start touring. So when everything kind of started shutting down, it was the period that I was on my break. So I was at home anyway. I just kind of didn't start touring again.
Yeah,
What about
it's
you?
insane. Like, had we known, like everyone made all these like plans,
Yeah.
and like the summer came to us. How many shows did you get in?
Well, we didn't start the tour. So like the tour is supposed to start on the 23rd of March, and around like the 13th, it just shut down,
Yeah,
you know.
that's
But I've
annoying.
been thinking about this, and it's like normally we release an album and we tour it, and it's like we in the audience discover the music while we're on the road playing it and kind of doing our thing. This time, like everyone gets a chance to just process the actual recorded music, like the artifact that is the album. There's something kind of exciting I like about that. That it's
Yeah,
not like we're giving that live energy and people are like kind of considering what the album is in the context of our live performance. All they have is that document, the album.
yeah, which is super important. I feel like that your live shows, you know, fall into a space that's not so much just like going to a concert and hearing songs that you know.
Mm.
It's more like a conversational. I thought
Yeah.
that when I saw you play in Austin, Texas, which was like crazy, like a year ago. I guess we could probably frame up how we met. For everyone tuning in. Super crazy. I've been a fan of the music, known about the music, and we were in the hotel lobby at Austin, Texas, South by Southwest, and just I never saw you, but I knew by your presence who you were, which is
Oh,
crazy.
wow. Yeah. I kind of saw you and I was like, you know what? I'd seen that you tweeted the name Sons of Kemet about a year before. So I
Yeah,
was like, he definitely knows about the band. I'm just going to go up to him and say, what's happening,
yeah,
you know?
uh,
And then, told you about the gig and you came down, which is great.
yeah.
Yeah.
Brought some friends. Organic link up. That's how it should be.
Yeah.
I'm excited about the topic that you threw together for this.
Mm. Yeah, just looking at how we both organize ourselves within these structures. And I've been thinking a lot about what I meant about that topic, and what I mean by structures. Like, what is the structure that the structures can be kind of disintegrated, but what's the one thing that we're stuck in? And I think that thing is history, is the thing that we're both trying to navigate in some way. And that's not
Yeah,
like long history from a far place. It's history as in what's just happened. How do you relate to the immediate and the far past? You know, and for
yeah,
me, like that, asking those questions is what's formed all of my music.
yeah,
Just the act of actually saying, how do I relate to American jazz that's happened before, and it's constantly kind of I don't know, it's constantly dying. It's constantly creating new things that don't need to be created anymore. How do I relate to that from someone that's not even within the culture?
yeah,
And it's like the answers are the things that you hear on the records, like Sons of Kemet or the Comets coming after Rocking the Ancestors.
yeah. Do you? This is a question before I even answer it. I want to toss it to you. Do you have a pleasant relationship with the past construct of your art, or is it like tumultuous?
No, I've got a great relationship with it. You know, as in like when I go back to what I've worked on in the past, it just feels like a part of me that's over that I can then have a conversation with. I can learn from it, even if it's something that I'm not totally happy with. It's like a conversation with just a moment in time, and then
Yeah,
I can think about what was happening around that moment. It's like this is how I feel about all music. It's a document, you know.
yeah,
It's that some of the documents make you move and feel in certain ways, but they're all just ways of us archiving what's happening at that moment in our artistic life. So some
yeah.
things I love that I've done more for how they make me feel about where I was when I was recording them than the music themselves.
Yeah,
You know?
one of the things obviously that'll come up through our talk is a little bit is obviously about like where we come from and how it relates to the continent of Africa, how it relates to the outside world.
Mm,
But within jazz and your sort of dialogue with the history of jazz, it being a sort of black art form, does that does that make it in terms of like dealing with like a purist of jazz
mm.
or a tourist of jazz, how does that affect what your
Um,
work does and how you investigate it? The fact that you're sort of dissecting a black art form.
mm. But I mean, I feel like the diaspora has a mission. Like, there's got to be some point in there being a diaspora, like there being a scattered amount of African people around the world. And for me, that mission is to cast perspective on on both our art forms as a communal group and the music of Africa. So me relating to jazz is me casting my perspective on the art form of jazz, and that's all I have to offer. You know, it's for me, it's really simple. It's like all I can offer you is how I see the music that has been played before, and what I see as important or significant in it. And that significance is what I find is significant comes from my personal history. You know, I might listen to a Sonny Rollins solo, and what I see is as significant is him playing the outro and jamming on one note. And I might go, that all that harmonic stuff was amazing, but that bit he did at the end with that one note thing, that's what I want to base my entire solo on next time. And
Yeah,
it's constant, dialogue in that sense, in that it's just seeing what resonates with me from a historical point of view.
yeah. Because where it ties into the work that I do is a bit like, it's funny to have just even hearing you explain that and the comparing and contrast of the different field. So for all of our followers listening at home, I guess we should do like the introduction. I was thinking because it's cool to share this, but I want to make sure everyone gets the most out of the conversation. Uh, I'm Virgil Abloh. I design, I make artworks, I altogether try to be creative. You're Shabaka Hutchings. You give yourself your own sort of qualifications.
I play the clarinet, the saxophone, and I'm an instrumentalist
Yeah,
who I play in the band Sons of Kemet, The Comet Has Come In, Shabak and the Ancestors. And I've been a part of the London jazz scene for a while now. I was born in England, grew up in Barbados, and moved back to England at 16. And it's like my career has been a process of trying to learn from all the musics that I've encountered along the way and somehow connect all the dots together. The
gotcha.
products have been the music that I come up with.
Yeah, and for me, my parents are from Ghana in West Africa. They moved to Chicago, had me and my sister, and since then I've been on this journey to sort of express my findings in the realm of art, architecture, fashion, and just in a broad stroke, creativity. But what I found, obviously, as like a young kid growing up, is that in a bit of a ways, and I want to ask you specifically, is like the art, music, especially particularly jazz, being a black art form, you're entering it with a sort of on a level ground, so to speak. When I was young, sort of expressing myself or investigating art, architecture, fashion, I noticed that there was this barrier that
Mm,
was sort of in a way like depicted based on sort of your outer look, you know, your expression, like where are you from, and the sort of canons of sort of that world of creativity is doesn't usually include Africa or
mm,
Africa in the same way, or you know, I'm American, so Black American as well. So I found that I was having to sort of do in the same way, sort of investigating the sort of art form, but incorporating a new perspective, which thankfully brought me here today, but is sort of what makes me unique in sort of the investigations that I'm doing now all the way forward.
mm. I mean, it's like for me, it's like the investigation of the past is that's the future. In
Yeah,
that everything that I do in going back, or everything that I guess we do in going back, is just maybe it's almost like it's you're trying to nuance the past. You're trying to make the past an organic matter. So whenever I've found people that have been, or found artists that I've talked to, and they seem to be stuck in some kind of rut, intellectual rut or artistic rut, it feels like they see the past as something that's finite, that has a stop point, and they're trying to race toward, like they're trying to grasp a past that has been formed, and they don't know how to quite kind of like articulate themselves around it. Whereas for me, I'm seeing the past as something that I have a conversation with, you know. So if I think back to my time in Barbados, between 6 and 16, I'm trying to think about what were the musical events, what were the kind of just musical feelings that I had, but with the vision that I have now, being from London, having all those influences, you know.
yeah.
So
Now,
yeah.
very
Mm,
much the same. I think, like, um, it, you know, a lot of what sort of has come sort of my recent investigation, especially starting at Louis Vuitton and my first show, sort of trying to articulate that that realm of fashion can have a different muse, is that within fashion and art, there's a sort of there's a different set of canons that like a black expression within art and fashion have than a European one.
mm,
Um, and sort of being my relationship with the past is sort of is it's valuable, it's the foundation, it's equally important. But within those realms, those sort of sacred realms of like high fashion or high art, there there needs to be the canons of like a black expression need to be written now more than just the practice of putting out new work.
mm.
Um, and those are, you know, this is a quarantine edition of this new idea, jazz hours, that I was thinking about. Whereas, like, you know, this pause in sort of society for me has allowed not just being busy with doing more work as I normally would have been doing, have this pandemic not sort of ruled the world. It's a little bit about a derivative higher and thinking about what new strides can us sort of viewing the past sort of be more poignant in going to the future.
Mm.
And the text that you said, a part of our required reading, I think it would be a good point to sort of reread that. Maybe show people that book, because I got a lot of requests. Do you have it within arm's reach?
Yeah, the Morton Feldman. So it's Morton Feldman, Collected Writings of Morton Feldman. Give my regards to 8th Street.
Yeah. Maybe explain the quotes that you underlined, and we can run through that.
Yeah, so we've got: the composer's surface is an illusion into which he puts something real, sound. The painter's surface is something real from which he then creates an illusion. Is that the one you're thinking of?
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's talking to, actually, I'll just read the passage before that. That might actually give a little bit more context. He's talking to his friend. He said, "I was thinking about this. I called my friend Brian O'Dirty. Brian, I asked, what is the surface of music I'm always talking to you about? How would you define or describe it?" Not being a composer or knowing much about music, he was hesitant to answer. After a while, he said, the composer's surface is an illusion into which he puts something real, which is the sound. The painter's surface is something real, which then he creates an illusion with. You know, so he's saying like the musician, you know, he's starting with that point of view, with that essential thought, that essential, you know, feeling, atmosphere, that then he finds a tangible, you know, sound collection of notes to actually, you know, kind of form it with. Where the painter starts with the material. You know, it's like they're guided by that tangible thing that exists already, and then that kind of sculpts the way that they, you know, their brain, that sculpts their thoughts and their expression.
Yeah. Which to me like boils down to the impression of when I went to your show, you know, like listening to you and your band perform, there's this sort of, I feel like the key word is like humanity allows to like, it's almost like you're allowed to dream in real time, you know?
Mm.
There's no like, obviously it's not something of like a rap concert or like a lyric driven thing where you're going and you're reciting the lyrics and you're happy to hear what you hear in your iPod live, where your realm of jazz, it's like, you know, it's an abstract composition of notes that is hypnotic in a way.
Mm. I mean,
And to the quote that you were saying is like, you know, the illusion sort of allows that sort of trip to take place. And a little bit of what, you know, I'm at in my practice with fashion is sort of like, what was his description of what like a canvas was, that it's like finite?
he says, music has a surface that constructs with time. Oh, here it is. The composer's surface is an illusion into which he puts something real, which is sound. The painter's surface is something real, which he then creates an illusion of.
Exactly. And I think that quote highlights a little bit of my newfound tension with fashion, or less art objects when I make those. But fashion, it's like, it's a little bit too literal of a, you know, that's why I'm glad it's only like one piece of the pie of my whole practice. But I've often thought that it's like an emotional dead end to make a million t-shirts, you know, or to make pants, to put them in a series of combinations and let them walk down a runway doesn't begin to tell a wide enough of a story, just in its own practice. Obviously, that's why my fashion shows have gotten a little bit more abstract. They're combining music, they're telling different stories, and it's the world around the actual clothing that is painting my full picture. But a little bit about our overarching concept about like sort of like the Black expression is that I'm now realizing that sort of discrepancy is that there hasn't been the canons of Black expression sort of widely spread around the world for people to truly understand the nuances that are within the sort of overall expression.
I mean,
And
that's
those are
what
just like striking.
That's one of the things I think about, just the trend that's happening now in jazz, where we're starting to see people who wouldn't have 10, 15 years ago identified as jazz fans, starting to see that it's music that has a connection beyond that genre. You know, like when we say the word jazz, like it's almost like when you use your quotation marks. Every time I hear the word jazz, it comes with 2 quotation marks. And those quotation marks, it depicts one, the person who I'm speaking the word to. So that could be all the history that they have. If I'm talking to someone who has a limited history of the music, my saying the word jazz could mean music that they eat dinner to. You know, it could mean music that they've seen played by old men in pubs. You know, if I'm talking to someone who knows about the developments of the music, it could mean a totally different thing. It could mean like the vanguard. It could mean protest music. You know, it could mean like the peak of Black expression. So me, that's the important thing, or like considering the quotation mark in who you're trying to give these messages to, like even when I'm referring to the music. And I feel like the audience today has started to appreciate that there is a quotation mark, you
Yeah.
know, as opposed to just seeing the word in itself. Like, say, yeah, I don't like jazz, or I think jazz is this type of music. They kind of listening to it and going, I'm starting to see how this relates to everything that these performers are hearing, like everything that surrounds them,
Yeah.
you know.
And that's, you're hitting on sort of obviously the connection point in both of our practices is that, you know, early often when I realized that obviously my voice, but obviously this this sort of level of like intellectual thinking on a creative practice within a Black art form doesn't have a formalized sort of like education base. You know, there's not a sort of like widely understood and accepted set of things that have happened in sort of Black creativity that are taught in schools from London, England, Japan, etc. You know, it doesn't sit in the same sort of foundation as everything I learned from, you know, my art architecture school and engineering and everything before it. And, you know, I employed this language of using quotation marks to sort of speak in layers rather than, you know, speaking in sort of exact definitions, because my ideas and the history of my ideas and the history that comes with my skin color is influences how people receive the work. You know, that's what we mean for one. But B, allows an understanding of where these ideas come from. But yeah, the quotation marks are a powerful sort of like modernist tool. And by modernist, I mean like 2020 going forward of communicating different ideas at different levels, not being so monotonous, and allowing discrepancy to sort of shape a future vision.
I mean, this is going into that realm of spirituality that I've been talking to a lot of people in South Africa about, you know, like even the guys in my band, Shabak and the Ancestors, when they talk about the tenets of ancestral worship as practiced today, you know, by people in South Africa, they're talking about a circular approach to time where things aren't happening on a linear level where one person experiences knowledge or experience throughout their lifetime, and then at the end of their life it ends. There's a circular kind of mode of knowledge. So knowledge forms keep on repeating and showing themselves in various different, you know, different levels. You know, so it's like the what I'm doing in relation to what, you know, Louis Armstrong was doing, in relation to what, you know, his forefathers were doing, in relation to what people are doing in Africa, is happening in a trajectory that loops around on itself. You know, and if
Yeah.
you can see the kind of the shortest point of that in those loops, like the point from one end to another, is shorter than kind of going around in a spiral. You know, so it's almost like if we're trying to look into history with the knowledge that the history is still present, and it becomes present by us actually manifesting it in various different ways through trying to just employ it with a perspective gained from like the now. You know,
Yeah.
and for me, that the hard part is actually understanding what is now, like what is the present. You know, it's like the coronavirus is an amazing metaphor for that. I feel like there was a point, especially in England and the US, where there was a reluctance to accept what the present was. The
Yeah.
present being, we are within a pandemic, and our governments need to sort it out, need to like accept that and do the necessary precautions. You know, it's like they're living in the past. They're living in an ideal version of the reality, a reality that they are trying to project onto, you know, onto the population, whereby the present is a virus passing through the entire
Yeah.
population. So it's like we're trying to actually have a grasp of what's happening in the present, what's actually happening now, so that when we refer to the past, it collides with our knowledge of, you know, of what's happening now, and it creates for me, that creates the future. That
Yeah.
creates the kind of music or the kind of thinking that people define as futurist. People define as forward thinking. You
Yeah.
know.
I love this train of thought because in my practice, you know, there's an obsession with like new, right? And, you know, with just being specific within like fashion or art, like if I post an image of like a white t-shirt, right? You know, just dumbing it down or generic,
Yeah, yeah.
making it super generic, like the innate sort of context of inserting that into now from the past is like that white t-shirt has been done a million times. Like, you know, haven't you seen that white t-shirt before? But and I'm you know, I'm a proponent of dispelling this myth of obviously like being focused on it being inventive to the point where it's never been seen before. Do you, your relationship with the past or sort of investigating the past, like how do you acknowledge like the canons of the past in your work as you sort of investigate it and break it apart and offer something new?
Well, it's just different. It's different ways of seeing the past, as in different ways of perceiving it, different ways of considering it. So that's my kind of relationship with the past. It's how do I actually go towards it? Am I going towards it thinking I know what's coming, I just need to learn something technically from it? Or am I going towards it saying I want it to change me. I want it to continually change me. Because I do think that, you know, I'll be talking about the past in a very general term. We're not kind of giving any specifics, but I think that there are some universal aspects to the, I don't know, the uncontained nature of information. You know, like there's so many ways of perceiving things. So it's not just about, do you know what's happened in the past? It's about how do you react to that thing in the past. You can have a white t-shirt that you display to someone and they can say, I've seen a white t-shirt 100 times. I don't need to see a white t-shirt. But then you might say to them, have you thought about a white t-shirt in more ways than one? Exactly. And it's that second way of thinking about a white t-shirt that I'm trying to get you to do. So you're seeing the same thing that you've seen in a multitude of days before, but you're thinking about it in a completely different way. And that's my relation to the past. It's not about what you're seeing or hearing. It's about how you're considering it in relation to your present. Yeah. And the more you learn about your present, the more you're able to actually depict the past in a way that has some kind of bearing that makes any sense.
Yeah. Now, as you were just using those words, I was thinking through, like within my practice, and obviously the sort of main bullet point, if we were putting post-it notes of bullet points of this sort of discourse, is the idea that within Black art or Black fashion, there isn't a sort of formalized canon yet, you know? And like something as sort of basic as a white tee, obviously there's, you know, I just finished this documentary in his own words. It's like Martin Margiela sort of explaining his past and how he was sort of discovering things which, you know, are immediately like inserted into the canon of fashion, you know, with good cause, but you know, that's the canon, it's there. And so things like taking a ready-made object and converting that into fashion is attributed to him. The meaning also is bestowed to that logic of thinking. But I was just thinking about how within obviously Black fashion and the lineage of it and the history of it, there's a song from Da Franchise Boys called White Tee. And it was this era in the 90s of obviously the white tee in Black culture means like undoubtedly crisp, you know. It's a basic item that costs maybe $3, but every day of the summer, if you wear a fresh white tee, it means that you're like cleaner than clean, fresher than fresh. And this song sort of in Atlanta exhibited like the oversized white tee, you know, it was a tall tee, so super big, so it was like the bigger the white tee, the more value that you get out of it. And inserting that, you know, that's where the quotation marks come into play. So if I'm sort of iterating on this white tee in the design studio and I'm playing, I know that there's a sort of canon within European fashion that exudes that emotion, but I also have this history that has been largely undocumented. So that's where I play in the realm of merging both sentiments into like a new future expression, which is where I find my freedom, where I find my voice. Like being
Mm.
specific about your past, who were just so the listeners in on the conversation, when you reference past and jazz, who are the canons for you?
So for me, it's like, first of all, I play the tenor saxophone. So the first point of contact is John Coltrane, Pharoah Sanders, Sonny Rollins, Sam Rivers, just the people that you would acknowledge as the kind of great, like carriers of the torch. And it feel like I've got a different relationship to each of those players, in relation to when I started listening to them. So someone like Pharoah Sanders, when I started listening to him, I wasn't as much of a fan as I am now. My relationship with him has grown. The same with John Coltrane, with same like Miles Davis, with certain periods of his career. I feel like I go towards these artists and I grow with them. And, like a person like Louis Armstrong, when I started listening to him, I knew that he was supposed to be a great, but I was listening to him being a kid in Barbados,
Yeah.
And I was into calypso, I was into reggae, hip hop. This is like the mid '90s, so I'm into hip hop. I'm into like Bone Thugs, E40, Tupac,
Yeah.
Outkast, and I hear this jazz music, and I'm just like, I don't know what this is. I don't want to, I don't want to hear it. It's not doing anything for me,
Yeah.
The things that change that is my seeing the music live, my engagement with it as an actual, like living thing. Like when I moved to England, one of the first people I met was Soweto Kinch, who was running a jam session. He was doing some jazz interspliced with hip hop and their experiments at that time, but then still playing straight ahead jazz with real fire, And in
Yeah.
some ways, when I think back, it was a real privilege to be able to be in that environment. I've seen someone really playing jazz with a kind of fire that I could identify from the reggae performer.
Yeah.
So when I think of someone like Sizzler or Capleton or Anthony B jumping on stage in the Caribbean, I see someone who is like hyped up, who wants to see that crowd, like bursting out of the stadium. Like maybe an equivalent is someone like Travis Scott, who
Yeah.
as soon as he touches that stage, that what he's trying to do to that audience is elevate,
Yeah.
is they want every single person to be feeling a group, like a communal sense of elevation. No
Exactly.
one can be left behind. And for me, that's something that really resonates with me and Caribbean performers. When you get those soca monarch competitions where it's about who can, you're trying to get the whole crowd to jump up, jump up, jump up, jump up. And it's like, you're getting that consistent thing and everyone is kind of going up. So when I moved to England and I started to see that there was jazz being played with that same spirit, the spirit of we're going to make every single person in this room move.
Yeah.
I started to listen back to the jazz recordings that I had heard before and was like, the only image in my head was like what I'd seen on TV, which is maybe jazz being played in cocktail bars or not
elevator
with any kind
music
of,
or something.
And it really connected that thing that it is a black art form that has black aesthetics to it, and by black aesthetics, I mean aesthetics that stretch beyond the capitalist mode that it's framed in, aesthetics that speak to communality, that speak to some level of depth in terms of spiritual upliftment. And, by spiritual upliftment, I mean, music where it elevates a part of you that is unquantifiable.
Yeah.
Everyone individually will know what that means to them. It's like no one can tell you, and it's not a specific type of music. There's music where when you listen to it, you feel energized. For me, I interpret that as a spiritual expression. And as soon as I start to see the connection in that expression throughout various either art forms or type of musics, then I start to see like the connection of people, because people are the beings that are doing this thing. So like if I hear a jazz musician raise a crowd to a level where everyone is like, I can't understand what's happening, but I'm just going to scream. And then I go to a rock concert and see someone do the same thing, it gives me like this faith that we're all trying to do essentially the same thing, which is have a communion with people and like
Yeah.
move ourselves out of the present. The question is for me then, where do we go? Are we trying to go out the present into the past or into the future? And I think there's a way of doing all together, and that's when you get deep music or deep experiences in general, when it's
Yeah.
not about whether your frame of reference is the past, the present, or the future, when it's all of those things combined, you know?
Yeah. Which is like, you know, when we talk about like our ancestry and the way our communities relate to each other, you know, this whole continent of Africa, and the sort of second nature of the soul that's in the earth that comes through the people and the music, the expression, the way they talk, the way they express themselves. I think in essence, we're a part of that tribe that's traveling the world, working in different art forms, putting that ancestry on display in different art forms, you know, as like a baseline. And I think that like ignoring sort of race in the place that we are, I always look at it as like humanity's goal is to like further our existence, right? And be more awakened as we do that, because we have the ability to look at the past and see what missteps humanity has taken, and to sort of like look at those with fresh eyes and say, hey, let's reanalyze how we relate to the environment. Let's reanalyze how we relate to people of different genders or different sexual orientation. And I think, you know, I'm an optimist, so I firmly believe that our generation almost was on an amazing path before this sort of like wave of like political sort of pendulum swing brought us back with what, you know, Brexit in the UK, and, you know, with our recent sort of like engagement of our administration between the Obama years and these current years. But do you feel like us being sort of artists in the positions that we are in, I formally do, but I wonder if you feel the same, as like this tension and these epiphanies make it like our renaissance to create the in our pocket that we do? Do you feel that like open road and that optimism in your practice?
Yeah. I mean, I have to have optimism because music is my life. You know, so if I don't have optimism about music and the health of the music scene, it means that I'm not optimistic about the future of myself, you know. And
Wow,
for me,
yeah.
the future of myself starts with me believing that there is a future, you know, and assuming that there's a future. Is like, if I sit down to compose a tune and I think there's a possibility of me not having any ideas, then I can guarantee I'm going to think about that possibility, and all that time of thinking is going to be time that I could have been creating. You know,
Yeah.
for me that, and you know, as soon as like those thoughts come in, I stop, I do something else, run, walk around the block, whatever. But for me, it's about just accepting that, you know, we always have something to give. You know, we always have some you know, some way of navigating our situation that can be of benefit to either ourselves or to others. It's
Yeah.
just about kind of like accepting that. And that's the state of the music scene, the music industry. It's about how we are dealing with it on a, you know, in some ways on just on a personal level.
Yeah. Can you speak to, this is something that definitely I wonder, and sort of the people that follow me, I'm glad that we're building this bridge between typical musical taste of like a 17 to 27-year-old to where we're at in London. Have you seen the jazz scene and the community around jazz in your career? Is it growing? Do you feel it like sort of converting new minds, and the shows are sort of like adopting a wider, younger audience or older? Or how does it feel being insular within your scene?
I feel like we've gotten a young audience, like a core young audience that knows what the music's about. They know that when they come to the shows, it's a physical thing. They're free to do whatever they want. They don't have to dance but there's going to be some kind of forward momentum there that, that allows them to move themselves if they want. But there's also that side of the audience that might be older, that wants to listen to music with detail. They want to hear interaction. They want to hear the connection to the history, and be taken from a journey from the start to the set to the end. And for me, there's been that shift in jazz being a music for the listener that would consider themselves to be discerning. The listener that considers themselves to be a listener of music that's not necessarily about the body, that's about the head.
Yeah, so
now
they
it's
kind of
just
listen
open.
to it like this.
Exactly. And for me, I'm like, you know what? I want to make something for those guys or those ladies as well.
Yeah,
It can be everything. It's about the how you perceive the music, how what you're coming to the music with.
yeah,
It's like a music that 18-year-old kids can just be kind of like moshing to, but then
yeah,
someone can be in the back and listening to it and actually kind of getting an insight. That's
yeah.
my ultimate aim.
That's my same. You're highlighting a little bit of the epiphany that I had with my runway shows in the last 2 years or so. I have a great friend and stylist. Her name is Christine Centenera, and she, before I got into fashion, I'd spent 10 years going to shows and doing my sort of relation to the past, finding what I liked and finding, who I related to. And she described this one Hader Ackerman show as like when the dresses came out, all the editors started crying, and that was like an epiphany to me, because in some ways, obviously, like, clothes are an inanimate object, right? They're just some things that you have, but to compose them in a way with color, shape, light, and how you present them with the sonics as the backdrop, can literally evoke emotion and tears out of somebody's eyes. That sentiment obviously sent me on my current path about like pouring in a point of view that, in my realm, it's like very stark, right? Me showing, I don't know how many shows I've done, maybe like 20, 30, so, or whatever. I do them in Paris with specific reason. And I advocate them. I come out at the end of the runway show because there needs to be an image of a young black kid presenting these ideas in the sort of canon of European fashion. Like that's important. That image needs to exist. I can't be anonymous. It needs to be presented. But I firmly believe in the past and the canons of that. So just the same way as your audience who's like in the back, and I always make a joke in my design studios, like they do look at fashion, or they look at entertainment with their hand on their chin and looking to sort of be recalling the past that is the approved past. But obviously, as I've matured into my role, even the beginning in January, for instance, I had this feeling that now the black identity needs to be formally fused into the sort of lineage that I've been creating by these, 6 years of doing shows within Paris. And I texted two people as I was like prepping. I'd come off a break, and I texted Pop Smoke and West Side Gun, two artists in rap music that, in the months ending 2019 had sort of crafted two very important voices within music, and one of which was Pop Smoke basically connecting with London producers and bringing the sort of UK drill sound, which started in Chicago, formalized itself in London, and then but there was always that bridge that had never been crossed within like sort of UK rap, from grime or whatever. Like there's never been this sort of sharing that was happening. So that I thought was like, monumentous, and needed to be documented. And so I was like, hey, you have to come to the shows. And West Side Gun, who sort of brought back this sort of like nostalgia of 90s rap over soul samples, but modernized it with like a presence mixing the past and the future. And I was like, my sort of mood board on my mind was the Black identity no longer has to sort of be in the retail stores, just sort of propping up brand names and making them pop culture and sort of nudging the trends forward on a commercial level. It needs to be fused on the front row amongst the editors, amongst the sort of the establishment, because this 2020 period, it needs basically diamonds and chains back. Full expression of that canon needs to be fused into my work so that we can have exactly that same emotion that I saw when I went to your show. I saw a young generation just sort of like almost mosh pit dancing, expressing themselves without thinking about their cell phone or thinking about being cool. They had tapped into sort of like a different expression of music. And then you had the discerning, it was like a BBC showcase or something like that. So you have, discerning music industry coming to see what's going on. And I very much feel the same way about fashion, that my shows are a community gathering. They're just as much for the establishment as the kid who usually can't get into a fashion show. Let's spend 7 minutes together, sort of like sharing, and then leaving that show having a different idea about fashion because you've had the collective experience. You saw, rappers with diamond teeth and chains, like up close and personal. I had a tap dancer by the name Cartier Williams, like do this sort of emotional performance. And, but I stood true to canons of tailoring and sort of, my sort of icon in fashion, Pierre Cardin, and sort of was playing with the clothes in an intellectual manner. And the overall expression felt like, now my voice is fine-tuned to an expression that does exactly what we're investigating. How does analyzing the past but reinterpreting it in this amalgamation of ideas create emotion and become a future?
It makes me think of this. I did a gig in Istanbul a couple of years ago, and this guy came up to me afterwards, and he said, the feeling I had at your gig is a feeling that I've only before had at a football match. And that's the feeling that he can just like open his mouth and let rip and like let go,
Yeah.
Like he can shout all his frustrations, all of the tension in his body. He can do that. And he doesn't feel like anyone's, for one, going to hear him because of the amount of sound, but no one's going to judge him for doing that either. And, I realized that's for me what it's about. It's like, like music is like the gym. It's like there's one space that people are operating in, but everyone could be doing a totally different thing.
Yeah.
You might be in the gym next to some like hard knock that's just pumping and pumping, but you might be there doing some kind of like,
restrained,
like breathing techniques, for instance.
Yeah.
And this is what the musical sphere is. Like a lot of the time, like we can talk intellectually about music, and it's sometimes good to reflect about music in these terms. But a lot of times I'm on tour, I go onto stage and I'm like, I'm going to blow the saxophone so hard that someone is going to scream. And that is where the intellectualism ends, and it's like this intellectualism in framing the performance so that the landmarks that can take us through a musical journey. But then myself within that, I'm going to take the saxophone and I'm going to play so much saxophone that you are not going to be able to think about anything. And I love that. I love that feeling that we're doing different things. Someone might come to a concert to see a musical performance, and you've got a guy on stage or a lady on stage going, I am not giving you a musical performance, I'm giving you a physical performance. I'm giving you a physical, exerting. Like if I take the saxophone and I blow it as hard as possible for an hour and a half, it puts me into a trance.
Yeah.
And through that trance, I start to interpret reality in a different way. I start to form kind of correlations with elements of the past, and I start to feel what the audience, what the vibration of the audience is, what the atmosphere of the time is, and I present that in the music. And that's it, and there's all these,
And I think what we're doing, this talk is actually helping me write like the next book that I've decided that I want to do, which is sort of like framing these black canons with analyzing the past and seeing how that relates to the rest of the globe, right? You know, within art and fashion, especially, you know, in the American vein that, you know, I worked in, come and understood through in from years of designing album covers or stages, or, you know, learning about art by sort of engaging with it. There's always this sort of, you know, all of what you know is the restrainment, right? You just discussed it as like, I'm going to blow the saxophone so that it literally obliterates, you know, the confines of like intellectualism that's like restrained. You know, we're going to go to a different realm because this, you know, when you say that, I feel like it's coming from your soul.
Yeah.
You know, it's not a ploy. You know, this is Barbados. This is music that you must have heard, you know, at 6 years old coming out of a car stereo. Not something you had learned in school as a way to articulate like notes.
Yeah, I mean, this actually leads us on to something I was going to say, but I lost that train of thought while you were talking, you know, a couple minutes ago, about the nature of the institution, the nature of the archive, you know, in relation to Black forms of knowledge, forms of knowledge that have been passed from Africa to the diaspora throughout centuries. You know, there's sometimes, you know, going towards the forms of institutionalizing knowledge that we've been used to within a Western context, you know. But the interesting thing, you know, I think now, especially now that we've reached a point where all our institutions within society seem to have collapsed, it's about saying what are new forms of producing knowledge and new forms of sharing and storing knowledge. What are they going to be from now, you know? And if every single person sees themselves as the potential to carry or share some form of knowledge, everyone individually has to find, you know, like find the answers for themselves in whatever, you know, capacity that can be. So for me, that's musically. For you, it's, you know, I say musically. For me, it's musically and in whatever I come into contact with. For you, it's your artwork, your DJ, your thinking. You know, as everyone that hears this is going to have some element, you know, in their life that has to do with creativity and archiving the process of knowledge that surrounds that creativity. You know? So how do you take that to like an intellectually far degree outside of the institution? You know, is it possible to do the amount of studying that an institution like a university tells you is needed to get a master's degree without a master's degree, and relating it constantly to your community and to the wider society? You know, for me, these are the questions that are going to be asked, you know, with the fundamental change in society that, you know, for instance, this crisis is causing now.
I know the fact that people are doing like online learning when they're probably supposed to have graduated to get their degree, you know, in a couple months, now has them sort of looking at their bookshelves. Like my friend Mafuz is like literally that person who, you know, you get this understanding in relation to the formalized, like you just said, like institutionalized learning, but then, you know, the real work begins after you sort of like apply that to the real world. And a little bit of the context of what we've been talking about is like, you know, what's the future, or defining the future. And I like to think when you speak about your concerts, those are like condensed years of education learned in a formalized setting, right? Like it takes you through the idea of getting into a university, going to class and living, plus like learning and handing in papers and doing homework and doing a final to your professor saying one thing that cracks your mind open. Like the guy who you had that show in Istanbul, that sounds like 2 years of higher education. If that, you know, to get that epiphany that, you know, an hour and a half show of yours could transcend his mind to think about the world in a different way when he leaves that concert. You know, that's probably equivalent to 2 years of education.
I mean, there's some things that, like, the biggest lessons I've learned in my musical life, like, I can tell you them right now. They've been lessons that someone has told me, a phrase, a statement, and it stayed with me with everything that I do. You know, one of those was, there's a saxophone, a kind of free improvising legend saxophone player from Britain called Evan Parker. And I had a period where I did 3 gigs, like, in the presence of him in a week. So at the end of those 3 gigs, I went up to him and was like, Evan, you've heard me play 3 times. I just want you to be honest with me. What do I need to do? Like, what's the next step to just improve myself on any level, you know? And he looked at me and he said, you need to play everything that you know. You need to play, like, whatever you think is the thing that's going to get you the most impact in that present moment. You play the thing that makes you think there's nothing else left. And then when you think there's nothing else left, you're going to realize there's a little bit somewhere else. Then you play that, and it's like you're constantly searching for the end. You know, you're constantly trying to say, okay, this is the last thing, definitely the last thing I can play. After that, there's nothing else. Then you realize there's always something else. You know, and that's something you can actually, like, compare that to your ethos, like, under construction. You know, the idea that there is no end, there is always under construction. That the thought process of defining what constitutes the end is perpetual.
Yeah, it's infinite. You know, there's no, and it's that pulling from within yourself that creates the new. You know, there's less calculation. It's just emotionally sort of searching. That story recalls the same thing. You know, like, and it's funny. I'm a firm believer of, like, institutionalized sort of knowledge as a base, but then obviously, like, your own survey of investigating, and the combination is what makes the richness, you know, and it allows you to properly have a dialogue with the past. There has to be a knowledge of it, but there has to be, like, a feverish pursuit of, as you were just saying, like, defining what you're finding, you know, packaging it up and moving on. Like, two sites that, like, equally, like, there was a philosopher, a writer, Kierkegaard, which talks about this idea of, like, transferring ideas from one person to another is just like rearranging like giving someone the tools so that they can rearrange the furniture in their head all to their own, you know, rather than me telling you where to put the furniture in your head. Like, create the context so that the epiphany happens, so things start to line up. So there was, like, one mode, 2 different things. One of the required readings that I had was that list of David Hammond's sort of, like, just bullet point sort of, like, discussions. And then it was Louise Wilson, who was, like, the head of the MA, iconic professor at Central St. Martin's, whom I had met with, obviously, before I had been doing fashion formally or shows, and was, you know, that we had this, like, undying sort of, it's a little bit of, like, the formalized education voice on one shoulder, and the sort of, like, hey, I'm going to follow my own path sort of voice, which is like, hey, this movement that we're making within fashion, self-learning, might be enough. But we knew that there was the formalized education, and met with her to be like, hey, can we, you know, join